A young Canadian man, 26 years old, without a diploma, working as a firefighter in Toronto, receives a book that would change not only his life, but influence millions of people around the world. This is the extraordinary story of how Think and Grow Rich, written in 1937 by Napoleon Hill, transformed Bob Proctor from a hopeless failure into one of the most controversial and wealthy personal development gurus in history. But was this transformation real or just a well-constructed illusion? Leave your comment about what you expect to discover in this story that challenges everything we know about success and failure. The hopeless failure. In the cold winters of Ontario, Canada, a young Bob Proctor grew up in a modest household where dreams seemed as distant as the horizon. Born on July 5, 1934, Robert Corlett Proctor was a child plagued by poor self-image and little ambition. The industrial landscape of his hometown painted a grey backdrop to his early years, where factory smokestacks pierced the sky like monuments to working-class struggle. At just 14 years old, Bob's life took a devastating turn. While attending Danforth Technical School, a seemingly routine day in shop class became a nightmare that would haunt him for decades. The screaming whir of the bandsaw filled the workshop as students practiced their woodworking skills. In one horrific moment, the blade caught Bob's thumb, nearly severing it completely. It was dangling there, he would later recall, his voice still carrying the trauma 60 years later. It still hurts, and that's 60 years ago. This gruesome accident became the catalyst for Bob's descent into mediocrity. Unable to continue his technical education, he dropped out of school with no diploma, no prospects, and no plan for his future. The industrial town that had shaped his childhood now seemed like a prison, offering nothing but dead-end opportunities for a young man without credentials. For years, Bob drifted from one humiliating job to another. The grimy floors of automotive shops became his classroom, where he changed oil and rotated tires for pennies. Gas stations, with their acrid smell of petroleum and cigarettes, provided temporary employment. Factory floors echoed with the monotonous sounds of machinery, while Bob performed what he himself called dumb jobs. Each morning brought the same crushing reality, another day of manual labor for a few $1,000s a year. The Canadian Royal Navy offered a brief respite, though even there Bob's luck held no promise. Stationed on shore duty, he never set foot on a ship, spending his service time in coastal facilities that felt more like extensions of the factory life he was trying to escape. The crisp naval uniforms and military discipline couldn't mask the fact that he was still fundamentally a young man without direction. By his mid-20s, Bob had found his way to the Toronto Fire Department. The red brick fire stations of 1960s Toronto, with their brass poles and the constant readiness for emergency calls, provided steady work and a modest income. Yet even surrounded by heroes who risked their lives daily, Bob felt like he was merely existing, not living. The alarm bells that summoned firefighters to action seemed to mock his own internal silence, the absence of any calling or purpose that might rescue him from his ordinary life. The encounter that changed everything. The Toronto Fire Department of the early 1960s was a brotherhood of working-class men who understood the value of hard work and camaraderie. The fire station on busy city streets buzzed with the constant activity of emergency preparedness. Red trucks gleamed under fluorescent lights, brass fittings polished to perfection, while firefighters maintained equipment and shared stories between calls. It was in this environment that Bob Proctor encountered Raymond Douglas Stanford, a fellow firefighter who would unknowingly become the catalyst for one of the most dramatic personal transformations in self-help history. Stanford was different from the other firefighters. He carried an air of quiet confidence and seemed to possess an understanding about life that escaped most of their colleagues. On a particularly ordinary day, as autumn leaves scattered across Toronto's streets and the first hints of winter crept into the air, Stanford approached Bob with something unusual, a worn, dog-eared book. The cover was faded, the pages yellowed with age, but the title stood out boldly, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Published in 1937, this book had already influenced countless lives, though Bob had never heard of it. "You need to read this," Stanford said, his words carrying an unusual weight. For Bob, who had never read a complete book since leaving school, the suggestion seemed almost absurd. The fire station library consisted of technical manuals and emergency procedures, not philosophical treatises on success and wealth. Bob's initial reaction was resistance. What could a book possibly teach him that years of hard work and practical experience hadn't? He was 26 years old, settled into a routine of modest expectations and steady employment. Reading seemed like a luxury for people with time and education, neither of which Bob felt he possessed. But something about Stanford's conviction, coupled with Bob's growing sense of dissatisfaction with his circumstances, made him take the book home. The apartment he shared in Toronto was sparse, functional, a reflection of a life lived without grand aspirations. That evening, as streetlights began to flicker on outside his window and the sounds of the city settled into their nighttime rhythm, Bob opened the book that would change everything. The first pages were a revelation. Napoleon Hill's words seemed to speak directly to Bob's condition. The frustration of untapped potential, the sense that life was passing by without purpose or passion. Hill wrote about the power of desire, the importance of definiteness of purpose, and the mysterious forces that seem to guide successful people toward their goals. As Bob read deeper into the night, something fundamental began to shift. The fire station routines, the modest paycheck, the acceptance of mediocrity. Suddenly, these seemed not like facts of life, but like choices he had made without realizing it. The book wasn't just describing success, it was describing a completely different way of thinking about existence itself. What do you think about what you've seen so far? Does this transformation seem believable to you, or do you think Bob Proctor's story might be too good to be true? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The impossible transformation. The impact of Napoleon Hill's words on Bob Proctor cannot be overstated. Within weeks of finishing Think and Grow Rich, Bob made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He quit his stable job at the Toronto Fire Department. To his colleagues, this seemed like madness. Here was a man in his late 20s with no education and no business experience, abandoning steady employment to chase what appeared to be impossible dreams. But Bob had absorbed more than just inspirational words from Hill's book. He had internalized a methodology, a systematic approach to transforming thoughts into reality. The Toronto of the 1960s was a city in transition, with gleaming office buildings rising alongside older industrial structures. Bob saw opportunity where others saw only established competition. He started with what he knew, cleaning. But this wasn't just any cleaning service. Bob applied Hill's principles of definiteness of purpose and burning desire to create something unprecedented. He visualized his company not as a small operation, but as an enterprise that would serve the highest quality clients in multiple cities. The mental imagery was so vivid that he could see the uniforms, the equipment, the satisfied customers, and the growing bank account. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. In his first year of operation, Bob's cleaning company generated over $100,000 in revenue, a figure that seemed impossible for someone who had been earning a few $1,000s annually just months before. The secret wasn't just hard work, it was the mental conditioning he had developed through his study of Hill's principles. Word of Bob's success began to spread through Toronto's business community. Here was a former firefighter who had somehow cracked the code of rapid business growth, but Bob's ambitions extended far beyond a successful local cleaning business. He had discovered what he believed was the most powerful force in human achievement, the ability to align one's thoughts with desired outcomes. This is where Bob Proctor's story connects to something revolutionary happening today. You see, what Bob discovered through years of studying Napoleon Hill's work was the power of theta brainwaves, the same mental state that monks achieve through decades of meditation, that artists access during peak creativity, and that entrepreneurs tap into during breakthrough moments. Modern neuroscience has now proven what Bob Proctor intuited 60 years ago. Dr. James Rivers, a neuroscientist with ties to NASA, has developed the Genius Wave, a 7-minute audio program that uses advanced brain entrainment technology to activate the same theta state that Bob Proctor spent decades learning to access naturally. While Bob had to read Think and Grow Rich thousands of times to rewire his brain, the Genius Wave offers a scientific shortcut to the same mental transformation in just 7 minutes per day. If you want to experience the same cognitive breakthrough that launched Bob Proctor from failure to millionaire, the Genius Wave provides immediate access to theta activation through specially engineered audio frequencies. For just $39, you can download the same brainwave patterns that took Bob years to develop naturally. The link is in the description below, and it comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee. In 1961, Bob's growing reputation caught the attention of Earl Nightingale, one of the most respected voices in personal development and the founder of Nightingale-Conant Corporation. Chicago, with its towering skyscrapers and bustling business district, became Bob's new home as he joined the company that would shape his understanding of the personal development industry. Earl Nightingale was more than a boss to Bob. He became a mentor, a living example of how the principles in Think and Grow Rich could be applied on a massive scale. Under Nightingale's guidance, Bob's natural ability to communicate complex ideas in simple terms began to flourish. The former firefighter was discovering that his greatest talent wasn't in building businesses, but in teaching others how to transform their own thinking. Within months, Bob had risen to the position of Vice President of Sales at Nightingale-Conant, a promotion that would have seemed laughable just a few years earlier. But Bob was no longer the same person who had struggled through menial jobs in Toronto. He had become a student of success, someone who understood that achievement wasn't about circumstances, but about the mental patterns that create circumstances. Thank you so much for staying with us this far in Bob Proctor's incredible journey. Your engagement means everything, and I promise you, the best part of this story is still to come. The transformation you've witnessed so far is just the beginning of a saga that would influence millions and create one of the most controversial empires in the self-help industry. The birth of an empire. By the 1980s, Bob Proctor had evolved from a student of success principles into a master teacher. The bustling streets of Chicago had been his classroom, but now he was ready to take his message to the world. The decision to leave Nightingale-Conant and establish his own enterprise was risky, but Bob had learned to trust the mental processes that had already transformed his life so dramatically. You were born rich. The title itself was provocative, almost confrontational in its assertion. In 1984, when Bob first attempted to publish his book, the personal development landscape was far different from today. Publishers were skeptical of his unconventional approach, his blend of practical business advice with what many considered metaphysical concepts. Rejection letters piled up on Bob's desk. Editor after editor dismissed his manuscript with comments like, "This book is absurd, and these ideas have no scientific basis." The traditional publishing world wasn't ready for Bob's radical premise that wealth and success were not accidents of birth or luck, but natural outcomes of properly directed thought and action. But Bob had learned persistence from Napoleon Hill's teachings. If traditional publishers wouldn't recognize the value of his work, he would find another way. McCrary Publishing, a smaller house willing to take risks on unconventional content, finally agreed to publish You Were Born Rich. The book's success was immediate and explosive. What publishers had dismissed as absurd resonated powerfully with readers who, like Bob himself, felt trapped by circumstances and hungry for genuine transformation. The book didn't just offer hope, it provided a systematic methodology for achieving wealth and success that readers could apply immediately. As You Were Born Rich climbed bestseller lists internationally, Bob's personal life was also undergoing a profound transformation. He had met Linda, a woman whose own success story paralleled his own in remarkable ways. Linda had been struggling in the insurance industry, earning a modest $25,000 annually when she first attended one of Bob's seminars. The impact on Linda's life was nothing short of extraordinary. Within 18 months of applying Bob's principles, her annual income had jumped to over $500,000. But more than the financial success, Linda had discovered in Bob a kindred spirit, someone who understood that limitations were self-imposed and that extraordinary results were available to anyone willing to change their thinking patterns. Their relationship blossomed against the backdrop of Bob's growing international reputation. Linda wasn't just a romantic partner, she became a business collaborator, someone who understood the principles Bob taught because she had lived them herself. Together, they represented proof that the methods Bob described weren't theoretical concepts, but practical tools for transformation. In 1980, Linda had moved to Toronto and started her own financial planning firm. The success was immediate and substantial, but it came with an unexpected consequence. As her business grew, Linda found herself with less time for the relationships and experiences that truly mattered to her. The lesson was profound. Success without fulfillment was just another form of poverty. This realization led Linda to sell her thriving company and redesign her life around what she called the ideal work scenario. Her experience became a crucial component of Bob's teaching. The true wealth included not just financial abundance, but time, freedom, and meaningful relationships. The late 1980s and 1990s saw Bob's influence expand globally. His seminars filled auditoriums from Toronto to London, from Chicago to Sydney. But perhaps the most significant moment in Bob's career came when Australian filmmaker Rhonda Byrne discovered You Were Born Rich and recognized in Bob someone who could articulate the principles she wanted to explore in a groundbreaking film project. The Secret, released in 2006, catapulted Bob Proctor from a successful personal development teacher to a global icon. The film's premise, that thoughts become things through the law of attraction, wasn't new to Bob. He had been teaching these concepts for decades, but the global platform provided by The Secret introduced Bob's ideas to millions of people who had never encountered such concepts before. The price of fame and the controversies fame, as Bob Proctor discovered, was a double-edged sword. While The Secret brought his teachings to an unprecedented global audience, it also attracted scrutiny from medical professionals, scientists, and critics who viewed his claims with deep skepticism. The comfortable world of seminar rooms filled with eager students was replaced by a much more challenging environment where every statement was analyzed and criticized. The medical community's concerns were particularly pointed. Physicians worried that people suffering from serious illnesses might abandon proven medical treatments in favor of Bob's positive thinking approaches. When Bob suggested that cancer could be influenced by negative thinking patterns, the backlash was swift and severe. Medical journals published critiques of what they called dangerous pseudoscience, arguing that such beliefs could literally cost lives. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an oncologist at Toronto General Hospital, became one of Bob's most vocal critics. When patients believe they've caused their own cancer through negative thinking, she stated in a widely publicized interview, they often delay crucial medical intervention. We've seen people die because they tried to think their way out of diseases that required immediate medical attention. The scientific community was equally harsh in its assessment. Physicists ridiculed Bob's use of quantum mechanics terminology, arguing that he fundamentally misunderstood the principles he claimed to teach. His use of Kirlian photography as evidence of human energy fields was particularly controversial, as no scientific study had ever validated the existence of such fields emanating from the human body. But the criticisms extended beyond academic circles. As Bob's empire grew through the Proctor Gallagher Institute, former students and business associates began sharing troubling stories. Online forums filled with accounts of people who had invested thousands of dollars in Bob's programs, only to see their financial situations worsen rather than improve. Jennifer Walsh, a former participant in a high-level Proctor Gallagher program, invested $32,000 with the promise that she could easily double her income within a year. "I left my job because I believed in Bob's system," she explained in a detailed online review. "After more than a year of following everything exactly as taught, I was worse off than when I started. When I asked for help, I was told that my results were my responsibility, that I must not be applying the principles correctly." The business model itself came under scrutiny. Critics alleged that the Proctor Gallagher Institute operated more like a multi-level marketing scheme than a legitimate educational organization, with consultants earning commissions for recruiting new participants rather than for actual results achieved. The high-pressure sales tactics used to sell expensive programs raised ethical questions about whether vulnerable people were being exploited. Bob's response to these criticisms was consistent with his teaching. He maintained that individuals were entirely responsible for their own results. "There's nothing in a person's life they can't change through the law of attraction," he would assert, even when confronted with evidence of students who had followed his methods faithfully without success. Perhaps most controversially, Bob extended his theories to explain global economic conditions. He suggested that the 2008 recession was the result of excessive vibrational negativity that had attracted economic disaster to the global economy. Such statements struck many economists and policy experts as not just wrong, but dangerously simplistic in their analysis of complex systemic issues. The controversies took a personal toll on Bob and his family. Linda, who had experienced genuine transformation through Bob's methods, found herself defending not just business practices, but fundamental beliefs about the nature of reality. Their children, Brian, Colleen and Raymond, grew up in the shadow of both their father's fame and the constant criticism that accompanied it. Despite the controversies, Bob never wavered in his convictions. Even in his final years, as health challenges began to affect his ability to travel and teach, he continued to defend the principles that had guided his life for over 6 decades. He maintained that the critics simply didn't understand the deeper truths he was sharing, and that time would vindicate his teachings. On February 3, 2022, Bob Proctor died at his home at the age of 87. The Proctor Gallagher Institute announced that his death was due to natural causes, but provided no additional details. He left behind a business empire worth over $100 million, a family that included 11 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren, and a legacy that continues to influence millions of people worldwide. The question that haunts Bob Proctor's story is ultimately unanswerable through simple analysis. Was he a visionary teacher who understood profound truths about the relationship between thought and reality? Or was he a charismatic salesman who built a fortune by selling hope to people desperate for transformation? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing between these interpretations, but in recognizing that Bob Proctor's life embodied both possibilities simultaneously. What we can say with certainty is that Bob Proctor's journey from a failed firefighter to a global guru represents one of the most remarkable personal transformations in modern history. Whether that transformation was built on genuine wisdom or sophisticated illusion may depend as much on the observer as on the observed. Conclusion: Bob Proctor's story forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of success, the power of belief, and the responsibility we bear for our own circumstances. Can a single book really transform a life completely? Was Bob Proctor an inspirational visionary or a brilliant opportunist who built an empire on false promises? The evidence supports both interpretations. Thousands of people credit Bob's teachings with transforming their lives, while thousands of others claim to have been misled and financially damaged by following his methods. Perhaps this contradiction reveals something important about the nature of personal development itself, that the same ideas can be genuinely transformative for some people while proving completely ineffective for others. What cannot be disputed is that Bob Proctor's life demonstrates the extraordinary power of conviction. Whether his beliefs about the law of attraction were scientifically valid or not, his absolute faith in those beliefs enabled him to achieve results that seemed impossible given his starting circumstances. From a high school dropout working menial jobs to a globally recognized teacher influencing millions of lives, the transformation itself is undeniable, regardless of how we interpret its meaning. As we consider Bob Proctor's legacy, we're left with a choice. We can focus on the controversies, the criticisms, and the people who felt betrayed by promises that weren't fulfilled. Or we can focus on the transformation itself, the proof that human beings are capable of far more dramatic change than most of us dare to imagine. Perhaps the most honest assessment is that Bob Proctor was neither saint nor charlatan, but something more complex. A human being who discovered something powerful about the relationship between belief and reality, and who spent his life trying to share that discovery with others, despite the inevitable imperfections and controversies that accompany any attempt to commercialize profound personal insights. What do you think? Was Bob Proctor an inspirational visionary or a brilliant opportunist? Leave your opinion in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next surprising stories. Click on the recommended video to discover more secrets about the behind-the-scenes world of personal development.